It's call people together because you're saying, oh. But when you go to a conference, a convention, where there are school leaders together, then you feel safe. The problem is that we removed all that money that allowed them to go. So we only go places where where our boss takes us. And that is not a safe space. I'm sorry.
And I would turn it back also, not only for principals talking with each other, but for us having training with our teachers as well. Given that we're expecting changes and things, as the teachers see we get the same training as they do. Last week I went to a guided reading session with my 3rd grade where they watched an expert teach guided reading lessons. And I was there with them and we were able to talk about what we could do at our school and what their needs were. And so that helped me grow as a professional. It helped them grow as professionals, but it also kept that relationship building within our school. And there were other principals there with their teams as well, so we also got time to talk. So I think we need that support, that financial support to have those trainings, and also the time out of our buildings to be able to attend.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure we have many questions in the room, so if you have a question, please raise your hand. And remember, if you're online, please tweet at us, #ThankAPrincipal. Go ahead right there.
Hi guys, first of all, thank you so much for being here. I work for Rep. Davis, and she does a lot of work on kind of teacher leadership and principal leadership, and I thought it was really interesting your point of principals having the same opportunity to collaborate that we work so hard to make sure teachers get, and I know some of the actual practical enforceable solutions for teachers have been things like flexible schedules, like periods off where they can get together and talk, kind of those leadership pathways for them to be able to collaborate. Do you guys have any ideas on what that would look like for principals? Obviously, it's a little harder because you're one principal at a school, but I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on the practical application of creating collaborative environments for principals.
Let me touch on that first. In New York City some years ago, we changed the principal's contract to allow principals to work 12 months. But I think so often they've missed the opportunity to use that downtime when students are not in school 12 months, because students are not, to do the professional development time that they need to have. And if they would utilize that time for that, I think that's a good way to do that. I also believe that good leadership means that a school can run for a few days without the principal in it. Yeah. That's a true sign of good leadership, that you should be able to have the systems in place, the resources that come out of a district in case something does happen, to allow the principal to go out and be professionally developed. That's what I was talking about with corporations. That doesn't mean that the office closes down because they don't stop selling stock because they've taken the leaders out. And I think we're able to do that. And I think we need to be able to trust school leaders to be able to avail themselves of that opportunity.
Well, and to add on to that, I mean, when I'm out of the building, it gives my assistant principal an opportunity then to take on those leadership roles to prepare him or her for the principalship as well. And the staff gets to see her in that role of the leader of the building in my absence. And so, so in terms of big practicality, I think it can be done because it has so many more other benefits by allowing other people to step up and be leaders. So when I'm out, my assistant principal then takes over, and then we actually may pull up a teacher leader then to be in her role. So it really does afford others the opportunity to then hone their leadership skills as well.
And we're lucky in Maryland in that our school system is, we're by counties. So we have large school systems. So within our school system, we have, the principals have professional learning groups. So once, or 4 times a year, we meet as small groups to discuss common interests or common questions or work toward something we're all interested in to help us keep growing. So our directors help lead those learning sessions for us.
Great, thank you. Okay, over here.
A principal's role can be facilitated or quite constrained what would make an effective superintendent that would help you be the best principal that you?
Well, I think an effective superintendent should have been a principal, but apparently that's not a requirement. I didn't know that. But, I mean, I really do. I think I think a superintendent should have been a teacher, should have been a principal, should have, like, really understand what goes on in a school. I fortunately have a wonderful superintendent who was a principal. He was actually my principal. And so we have some really innovative things happening in our school district with everybody having a racial equity coach, including the principals and including the superintendent. He has one as well, because we're finding that race matters, and it intersects with poverty, and it intersects with gender, and it intersects with all those pieces that we want to separate. And so we have to really examine our belief systems around our Black and brown students. But I do think that a superintendent should have been a principal.
Does anybody want to add anything about the superintendent?
Sure, I'll speak. So I think often as evaluators, when we go into classrooms to observe teachers, we always talk about how students should be interacting and the teacher should be the facilitator of what's happening in that classroom. And I think that applies to the superintendency as well, that to give principals the autonomy to lead their buildings, but provide that facilitation or guidance when necessary, and that flexibility, and working with them and establishing a system-wide vision and goals that really, that they have had some input into, that they have invested in, and then that then translates down to teachers, which is down to students, that we're all focused and aligned in the same way. So I think, you know, superintendents just really need to trust in their building leaderships. I mean, they're in the trenches. They're the ones that are working through what needs to be done, and to really allow them the autonomy to do so.
And I would just add, the vision part for the superintendent is critical, because, you know, if you're trying to get everybody in the boat row in the same direction, you have to feel like you have a good captain at the at the bow or stern of the ship, making sure we're going in the right direction.
Well, I look at a couple of things. Number one, I want superintendents to have clear and concise goals and expectations. Tell people really what you want and be clear about what you want and what you expect to see. You also have to be a good listener and a good coach. You know, we forget that it's not about, you have to listen to what people are saying to you so you know how you can support them in what they're doing. And I think you also have to be really supportive. And you have to be honest. You have to talk about, if you can't provide the resources, you have to say, well, you know, I can't provide those resources, but let's figure this out together, how we get the resources you need to do the work that you're doing. And I think if you get that from a superintendent, I think you'll find that, and superintendents who do that well, their schools do well, and they don't micromanage. Just like a good principal does not micromanage good teachers. You know, you give support where it's needed. You do course corrections where it's needed, but if someone's really on point, you let them run.
If I just,
Oh,
one
absolutely.
other point I want to add to that. One of the things I tell my leadership team in my school, as we meet on a weekly basis, and as we meet, if they aren't telling me things that are wrong, and they're only telling me things I want to hear, then they're not an effective leadership team. And I tell them that. I said, I don't want to hear all the good things, because that's not why we're here as a team. We're here to make our building a better place, which means that things aren't working always as they should be. And so we need to address those. I need to hear them. And so I think the same applies for the superintendent, that they need to be able to hear what is working well, but also what's not working well, and to take that into consideration as well. So
We had a question in the back right here.
Last year, I asked my Air Force officer son, who's getting a lot of training, if you stay in full-time, what would be the percentage of your time spent on training? He said 12 to 20% of his professional time would be spent on training. In the education business, we don't talk about really what we need by way of policy. In your experience, what would be the range of your professional time that should be spent on professional development and training principals across the
Great
Was that
question.
should or what is?
No, should.
Okay. I wanted to clarify that.
What's the goal? What should we be looking for?
I'll start off with 20%, and I'll tell you why. I think the other 80% really should be spent on instruction. But if you carve that out, you'll realize that almost 40% of your time is spent on bureaucratic craziness. So if you took away from that 40% and gave 20% to professional development, then you can do the other 20 on the bureaucratic craziness. You have 60% to really deal with instruction.
So I would say that we need to, and maybe some districts across the country have done this, but I think we need to look at reorganizing, I think, how leadership is done in our schools. So I think having like a building manager that handles the emergency plan, that handles, you know, if there's a leak in the roof or things like that, to really allow the principal and the assistant principal to focus on instruction and on professional development. I think that's a way in which we can really increase that percentage. Because a lot of our time, as Ernest has said, is really dealing with day-to-day things. You know, I get calls about, you know, there's, you know, the cafeteria doesn't have hot water, and so we're making calls to the district, and, you know. So handling all of those kinds of things really do take away from our role as instructional leaders in our building. And so I'm all for, you know, as we look at the hierarchy of leadership within a school, really creating positions that handle those day-to-day operations and allowing leaders to be leaders of instruction, if you will.
Anyone else want to add how much time we think should be spent training? Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for being here today. Who is doing principal training and mentorship programs well, and what makes them strong programs?
It's a great question.
I'll talk about it. What we're doing in New York, the Council of School Supervisors and Administrators, we've created our own professional development program. It's called the Executive Leadership Institute. Over 20 years ago, we created it because we found out that as the union, we were spending an enormous amount of money defending people who just could not do the work. And we realized that we would put the money on the front end of this and help people to be successful. Why? Because people come into the principalship ill-equipped from higher ed to be the principal. And there was very little that was done that was within the system itself, preparing the bench as you moved up from teacher to teacher leader to assistant principal or supervisor to principal. And so we found out that it was the best thing for us to do was create this program, which is run by educators, many now recently retired, some still in active service, to provide tools for people who are doing this work every day. So whether it's in instructional issues or leadership issues or coaching, even something as simple as how to do, I think Robert mentioned it, we do a lot now more with budget. At one time, the superintendent says, this is what you have, you didn't touch it. Now you have a budget. You have to really, most of us can't balance our checkbooks. So imagine being responsible for making sure that personnel is where they need to be, staffing for equipment for sports teams, et cetera, coaches, all of those things that are above and beyond. So we've created it, and I found that professional development is done by people who are in the business, who know the business, is probably more lasting and more relevant.
I would also say that in our school system, what they've developed are teacher leaders who are planning on the principalship or becoming assistant principals. They have collaborated with local colleges, and that as they're working on their administration and supervision degrees, they are working as a cohort group. And so that's great because we build great relationships. It's like a 3-year process, but it's a great cohort. You build your peers as you're working on your degree.
All right. Thank you for that.
I also, as a first-year principal, the Maryland State Department of Education had something called the Principals Academy. And so all first-year principals were required to attend this Principals Academy. And it was nice meeting first-year principals from across the state and to be a part of that professional development opportunity. And so that was key. But I would also add that we as individuals are also responsible for our own professional growth as well. I mean, it's nice that, you know, we can ask the district that they should take some responsibility, but ultimately we also have a responsibility for our own professional growth and development. And I know for a fact I took part in the McKinsey Management Program for School Leaders that our organization, NASSP, has put forth. And so I think that that's an excellent way in order to develop, to grow professionally as well. So I just want to, I don't want people to leave here thinking that as principals we're saying that the government or that everyone else should be responsible for our professional learning. We do bear some responsibility for that as well.
Okay. There's a question in the back. Black shirt? That's you. Yeah. Yes. Sorry.
Hi, I'm just wondering, how important do you think, or unimportant do you think school level autonomy in hiring and firing is for the success of a school year?
Can I understand the question again?
Yeah, how important or unimportant do you think building level autonomy and staffing is for the success of a school year?
So I think I'll start off. It varies so drastically across the country as far as that's concerned. I know in my district, I mean, our HR department, if I have a vacancy, I turn to them. They provide me a list of candidates that I then interview, and then from that, you know, select from that list of candidates, I select someone. So that's the hiring process. And then when it comes to termination, that we get into a whole different story with collective bargaining units and contracts and the red tape that goes along with all of that process. So I'd love to have more autonomy in that decision-making process, but recognizing that it is a considerable amount of work and time and effort based on the process that's already in place to even begin that process. So I don't know how it is in other places, but it's pretty difficult. So I'd love more autonomy in that.
Anybody else want to
I
add?
think I've worked on it in different ways. I've been in both sides of this. In New York City, we've had a great deal of autonomy about hiring and termination, as most school systems do now. I don't know how much it makes a difference in what happens in your school. And I think if you ask people who've had the ability to hire and fire staff, they'll tell you it's all about what the quality is of the person that I have and what have I done to support them. And then you fall into the issue of where is their due process. And I don't know, you know, I mentioned before that the principal many times is the judge as well as the jury. And we have to also understand that we have our own biases and how we look at things. And so I think sometimes it's very important to have another level of someone else looking at the work that you're doing here. Principals want it also. They don't want to get to the point that the superintendent walks in and says, you know what, I don't like that tie you have on today. Tomorrow you're going.
And I would just say that as well. You know, it's hard when you become a principal and you go to a building that's already established and the staff was hired by one or two administrations before you got there. And sometimes you look at people and that prior principal raved about them and you're like, I don't see it because times haven't changed, or there's someone that didn't get recognition and you find them to be amazing. So you really need a good process. But one of the things we're trying to get away from, we joke about calling it the dance of the lemons,
Right.
because you don't, you know, they put in a transfer and your friend calls you, what kind of teacher are they? Are they a good teacher? And in your heart, you're going, come on, get that transfer. But, you know, you might say, oh, they're okay. They're very good with this. So we're all trying to be very honest with the staff we have and try and coach up those folks that need it, coach them up. And if not, then start the process for termination. It is a very, very, very hard part of our job.
Yeah. And just let me add one piece to that. I think a good leader takes what they have and tries to develop it, and when it does not work, you do something else. And it's the same thing that we have in public education. We don't pick our kids. And if we had the right to just every time a kid came, say, ooh, I don't like him, send him back, come on. We gotta be realistic.
Do we have time for couple more questions? Yeah, okay.
Okay, principal assessment has really been really big. Now, what would be 5 assessments you would place on a principal in your evaluation?
Five.
5, yeah.
Well, what's important to me is my staff. So I would want some kind of feedback on how my staff is feeling about school and their training, and I would like to know, as part of my evaluation, staff input. Community feedback. Every year I ask my parents, what can we do better, or how can we help you? So that would be part of it. And my students, even my pre-K, they set me straight on a regular basis. If I would go back to school now, there's one that pops her head out the door and says, Mrs. Song, you're late. Where you been? So I ask for, my 3 big. And then data is important. It gives us something that we can look at. So I look at all my school data. I look at test scores. I look at my attendance, all those pieces. So maybe grouping them together. And then also, we have in the past talked with, as an elementary person, talked to other elementary schools in our area, the middle school and the high school, as a group, a regional area, sat and had a conversation. So I'd like to see how my kids do in middle and high school, so that I can see that we're starting that good basis for lifelong learning. So I would want that, if somebody's graduating college and career ready, even though I had them as a kindergartner or first grader, I want some credit in that. Not that AP English high school teacher just getting all the credit. I want some credit when they were in kindergarten and they didn't know how to read.
You're right.
That's it.
You're
I
right.
want some credit.
Anyone else want to tackle assessments?
Well, I think, Carol, I think you did a good job in
Yeah.
outlining some things. I think the only thing that I would add to that is one of the things I'm really strong about, and I always say this, I say this to my kids, I say it to my parents and to my teachers, is that students come to us and they spend 7 hours a day, and some of them who are in after-school programs, 8 hours, 9 hours a day in our building. And it should be a place that they want to come to every day, and not that they dread coming to every day. And so I guess the feedback that I would want is this a place that you want to come to every day? And if it isn't, then how do we go about making it a place that you want to come to every day? And so that would be the only thing that I think that I would add to that, is just some feedback from my kids about how they feel about coming to our school.
I'd like to just add 2 pieces to this. Robert, you're right on target, because I was going to mention that. I would like, I think people need to look at what their staff retention and growth is. How are you retaining your teachers? But also, where's their growth? Are they going to get their doctorates? Are they going to school? Are they learning new things that they're bringing back? Because if you expect to do it all yourself, you're never going to get there. And the other thing we always have to look at is safety and security. How are we dealing with children's safety and making them feel good? That goes with Robert's saying. You got a lot of bullying going on that you don't say that you have, but you do, and kids don't feel safe and want to come, then you really need to be evaluated based on how you're doing that.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. You've had your hand up right there.
I heard you talking about teacher leadership and developing aspiring principals and assistant principals. I represent the National Network of State Teachers of the Year, and of which Leanne is a member. And we have a lot of teacher leaders who do not want to be principals. They want to stay in the classroom, but they want to take on more of a teacher leadership role. And I'm just interested in what you think about that, and how you might be able to use some of the teacher leaders at your school so that you can keep them, and also relieve some of that burden work, but they don't want to work on the plumbing and the bus line.
Primarily, what I've done, in my experience, is use them as the grade leaders, the teacher leaders, the professional development head, because they want to do that. They're really interested in helping adults learn. And there's a different, I want everybody to understand that adult learning is different than student learning. And so you have to give them that support. That's what we're talking about, retaining and growth. I had lots of people who never wanted to be the assistant principal, who even now have retired, never wanting to be the assistant principal, who've worked with me. But they were phenomenal teacher developers, coaches, mentors, and you have to give them those roles. And that means you relieve them sometimes from their classroom. You find the money to do that so they can spend time doing that. And they'll help you, in fact, many of them will help you develop people who want to move into the leadership role, because they'll identify other teachers who really have the same strengths they have, who really want to move into the supervisory role. So I think that's a very good way to utilize them.
So I'll take it a step further. What about those teachers that have that natural leadership ability, but really it's not being used, it's going to waste? And, well, not to waste, but it's just not being used. And so it's my responsibility as the building leader to recognize that in a teacher and to elevate it. And I'll give a good example, and George Lovera, I'm going to call you out right now. He's one of the teachers in my building, who came to me and said, my professional learning in our building, and this is my second year in my school, has historically been abominable. We just hate it. We just don't know what to, and so I said to him, so then let's look at this. How can we then make it something that people really want to do? And so I charged him with that responsibility, and he came up with this wonderful idea that he'd heard about from somewhere else, and it's called 10-Minute Tuesdays. Mm-hmm. And so for 10 minutes after school every Tuesday, staff members volunteer to provide some sort of professional learning on something that was successful in their classroom. And so George has taken this, and he's, depending on whether you present or whether you attend these 10-Minute Tuesdays, whether you're in the 6th, 7th, or 8th grade team, we chart who attends. And at the end of each quarter, the team that has the most that have either attended or presented, we have a luncheon for them and things. So taking someone who really was not happy with how things were going, but really didn't have any direction as to how to solve the problem, we worked together, and he came up with this phenomenal idea. And it's been great. I've been attending some of them myself and learning things from my staff members. So it's been a great opportunity. So here's someone who has no desire whatsoever to have any kind of leadership or anything, who has taken this on and done a fantastic job with it. So very, very, very proud of him and what he's done.
But Robert, don't tell him he's a leader.
No, I think he'd say he's the antithesis of that. So.
That was a great story. Anything else before we, it seems like we could have gone on forever, so I want to just thank all of our panelists and for their sharing their expertise. Really appreciate it.